Sometimes life sucks. You know, it just sucks. And I'm sure this day must have really, really sucked for our friend here when he literally did everything from scratch. He almost made it to the very end and then failed. Let's give him a name, shall we? Let's call him George. And we'll get back to George later. I would like to talk to you all about grit as a lesson from failure and a powerful driving force behind self-discovery and self-mastery. You see, I come from Kenya, which arguably is the home of long-distance running in the world. And in this quaint little town that produces all these amazing world-class Olympic champions, there's a saying that life is like a marathon. It's not a sprint. And while you do need strategy, good strategy at that, to effectively run a marathon, perhaps one of the most important things needed, stamina. And that's exactly what grit is. Grit is the ability to persist at something that you feel strongly about, and the perseverance in the long run, pun intended, despite facing challenges and facing obstacles. Now, grit has several traits. First, when you have grit, you have resilience. You see, for a while there in life, I felt really, really behind. I was fresh out of university, and as of the taking of this picture, this was roughly 3 weeks to a month after my mom had suffered a debilitating stroke. Till date, we actually don't know how she summoned the strength to make it for graduation after being hospitalized for several days. I'm sure glad she did, though. So yeah, fresh out of university, mom has just suffered a stroke. I was then laid off from my first job, and essentially what was my first attempt at corporate life. You know what they say, right? When it rains, it pours. And frankly, I was going through depression, functional depression, though unbeknownst at the time. And within that time, I tried many things, and frankly, I failed at even more, all while trying to get to my dream. So I started off in finance, became an accountant, failed at that. I then got into sales, didn't do too well at that either. I even became a farmer, all while trying over and over again to get into my dream career, which wasn't just media at the time, but more specifically, sports media. You see, I've always been a bit of a tomboy. And after many trials, many errors, way more rejections, too many to count, I finally got in. And I went from being a local journalist in Nairobi, Kenya, to becoming an international award-winning journalist. I ended up sharing spaces with, and I ended up interviewing some of the world's biggest stars. Now that is Ronaldinho Gaucho. He is a FIFA Ballon d'Or winner. And look, for those of you in the crowd who might not be too sporty, too sports inclined, for those of you in the crowd who might be a bit young to know who he is, I'll tell you this. He is basically responsible for teaching your favorite player, Lionel Messi. I'm sorry, Cristiano fans, but basically responsible for teaching Lionel Messi some of his best football moves. Look, it was the possibility of my dream at that time, because it definitely wasn't the reality. It was the possibility that I loved way more than I hated the rejections. Next, when you have grit, you have courage. So this survey was done by Linkago, which is a social media networking professional site, and it did it on about 1,000 people. Now, it showed that the most number of people, way up at 31%, were way more afraid of failure than they were of even tarantulas, giant-sized spiders, people. But the thing is this, it's not that gritty people are not afraid of failure, and it's not that they're not afraid of risk. It's that ultimately, their commitment to themselves, it trumps the fear and it trumps the risk. Because as the late, and on this I do have to say, very, very great Kobe Bryant once put it, you simply do not break a contract that you make with yourself. Next, when you have grit, you have a growth mindset. These two things go hand in hand. Look, gritty people, they fail and they fail really, really often, right? The only difference is, as sucky as it may be, they often look at failure as a chance to get to know themselves a bit more, to learn, to grow, and to develop. Grit is actually, as research shows us, directly correlated to your brain's neuroplasticity. So this is your brain's ability, right, to adapt and to change to different environments and to different phenomena. You see, grit, it's not this stubborn, rigid, linear route to success. I would argue that it's the exact total opposite. Grit is being in such a state of flow that once things don't work out, and in essence you do fail, that you're able to detach, you're able to reappraise a situation, and hopefully come up with a different solution. And this is why oftentimes, if you realize, gritty people are able to thrive in any environment, any country often that you put them in. The philosopher Neville Goddard, he gave us this really great example in the life of a tiny seed. So initially, when it's planted in the earth, this tiny little thing, if you think about it, is surrounded by what appears to be failure, right? The weight of the soil pressing upon it. Think about it, total, complete absence of light. But interestingly enough, it's precisely in these conditions that the seed is not only able to sprout, but grow. And trust me on this, I've been a farmer, I've lived on a farm, the whole 9 yards, is you can always plant new ones if the current crop fails. So far we've talked about courage, resilience, a growth mindset, adaptability, but grit also goes hand in hand with discipline. You see, when you're looking to get back up from failure and you're looking to better yourself, 1% better every day, as some people put it, boundaries that you set with other people on what you can and what you can't do, super, super important. But perhaps the most important boundaries that you could ever set in life are the ones that you set with yourself. Because the older you grow, the more you realize that self-control, it really is one of the highest forms of self-love. And also in time, you realize that it becomes less a journey of, awards, accolades, achievements. Though I'll tell you this, those definitely don't hurt. But it becomes less a journey of that and external wins, and it becomes a journey more of internal awakening. Because in the end, you'll realize that it was always you versus you. Or you and you, depending. So far, I haven't talked about one of the biggest buzzwords when it comes to grit, which is passion. Now, I consider myself a decently passionate individual. Perhaps those who know me a bit better, maybe some of my Kenyan friends watching would tell me, maybe they'd get up on stage and just go like, hey, that Idah. Idah can get very intense. And you know what? They're right. I can be a very passionate person. But not everyone knows their passions. And that's totally, totally okay. Dr. Angela Lee Duckworth is an expert in this field of tenacity. She talks about slowly being able to develop, harness, and cultivate your grit, even if you think you're not too particularly gritty of a person. So start with small goals, be accountable, be disciplined. But that needs a real solid foundation of understanding and knowing exactly who you are as a person. What makes you tick? What ticks you off? Your flaws, your shadow side, your insecurities, your inadequacies. How you can embrace that and hopefully better that. And the next part comes easier for some people. Your strengths. Because don't get it twisted, you cannot possibly push for something that you do not feel strongly about. Your persistence is directly tied to your purpose. But in this really interesting cycle, your purpose is directly tied to you knowing who you are, right? So it's this really intricate dance that, at least in this lifetime, it's quite hard to get out of. But part of life also being a marathon is knowing exactly when and how to pace yourself, no? It's knowing when to put the hands on the knees and just take a woosa, when to breathe it out, when to rest, when to re-strategize. And ultimately, sometimes, it's having the wisdom in knowing when to quit. You have to know when to hold them and when to fold them, right? The thing is this, though, and not to sound like a total, complete nihilist here, but the one thing I can pretty much guarantee each and every single person in this room, each and every single person watching, is all of us are all gonna suffer at some point in our lives. And it's interesting, right? Because we're here talking about, failure and success, and that unfortunately has a 100% success rate. Hate to break it to you. Whether it will be in the form of disappointments, failed tests, broken marriages, failed relationships, broken friendships, lost jobs, illness, and even ultimately, loss of a loved one. So why not start cultivating and developing this one trait that can possibly take you through some of those rougher times in life? Look, whatever disappointment, whatever failure, whatever loss you're enduring or have endured in life, let it suck. Let it suck. I cannot stress that enough. Acknowledge that it sucks, even if it's just to yourself. Hell, marinate in it if you must. And then when you feel the time is right, get up, dust yourself off, try again. And maybe this time, next time, try differently. So, remember George? Who remembers George from earlier? Remember George? Let's check up on him. Let's see how he's doing.
Makin lama kalau kau mah, kau makin ni.
So, what is your metaphorical cake? What is that one thing for you? Or two, or three, depending. But what is that one thing for you? Because for George, I'll tell you this. He definitely did not crumble. And if anything, he went through life and failure with a sense of balance and a sense of grit. Failure is feedback. It's not finality. And I urge you all to embrace the sense that George did. Thank you.